So, how does a small city-state on the Italian peninsula grow up to command a massive empire of 65 million people? And then, how does that same seemingly invincible empire just crumble? Today, we're going to unpack the thousand-year story of ancient Rome, from its mythical beginnings to its incredible fall. This is a story that has everything: ambition, genius, brutal civil war, and it's a story that literally shaped the world we live in. And the wild part is, it doesn't start with some proven historical fact. It all kicks off with a powerful legend. The legend goes that Rome was founded way back in 753 BC by Romulus, one of two twin brothers who were supposedly raised by a she-wolf. For the next 2.5 centuries or so, a series of 7 kings ruled the city. It was a time of growth, for sure, but it all ended in a revolution. The last king was a total tyrant, the people got fed up, and they overthrew him, which paved the way for a completely radical new idea. So, with the kings gone, the Romans set up a republic, what they call the res publica, which literally means the public thing. The entire goal here was to make sure no single person could ever become a tyrant again. So instead of a king, they had 2 consuls who held the top job. But here's the catch: they were only elected for 1 year, and they could veto each other's decisions. A brilliant system of checks and balances, all advised by a powerful council of elders called the Senate. But let's be clear, this new republic wasn't exactly a democracy for everyone. Not at first. Its early history was basically defined by this massive internal conflict called the struggle of the orders. You had the patricians, the wealthy, aristocratic elite who held all the power, and then you had the plebeians, the common folk, the farmers, the soldiers, pretty much everyone else, and they had almost no say in how things were run. Well, the plebeians weren't just going to stand for that. They used this incredible tactic where they would literally just leave the city in mass, a kind of general strike, refusing to work or fight until their demands were met. And you know what? It worked. They won the right to elect their own officials, the tribunes, who could veto the Senate. They made the government write down the laws for everyone to see. And eventually, the laws they passed in their own assembly became binding on everybody, even the patricians. This internal stability was absolutely crucial, because it finally allowed Rome to stop looking inward and start looking outward. Okay, so Rome is now the master of Italy, but its growing ambition puts it on a collision course with the other big power in the Western Mediterranean, the mighty naval empire of Carthage. The sea just wasn't big enough for both of them. And what came next was a brutal, century-long fight to the death we call the Punic Wars. The second of these wars is where Rome was pushed right to the brink of total collapse, and was all because of one man, the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, a true military genius. He did the impossible. He marched an entire army, complete with war elephants, over the frozen Alps and down into Italy. At the Battle of Cannae, he pulled off a flawless maneuver, surrounded a much larger Roman army, and just annihilated it. It was a complete catastrophe that would have shattered any other nation. But here's the thing about Rome. Its real superpower was its insane resilience. After a disaster like Cannae, anyone else would have surrendered. But Rome? They just refused. They took the hit, raised new armies, and kept on fighting. It reminds me of what an earlier king who'd fought them said: "One more such victory, and we are lost." That was the Roman spirit. In the end, their sheer willpower won out. And by 146 BC, Carthage wasn't just defeated, it was wiped off the map. So now Rome is the undisputed champion of the Mediterranean. Unbelievable wealth is pouring into the city from all the new territories. But this success turned out to be a kind of poison pill. See, the Republic's government was designed to run a small city-state. It was completely unequipped to handle a global empire. And ironically, Rome's greatest victories had just planted the seeds of its own destruction. Let's break down what started to go wrong. First, you've got soldiers coming home from years of war only to find their family farms have been bought up by the rich elites. This created a huge class of angry, unemployed people in the city. Second, you get generals like Gaius Marius who start recruiting these poor landless guys into the army, promising them land in return for their loyalty. Loyalty to him, not to the Roman state. You can see how that's a problem. And finally, politics just got violent. When reformers tried to fix these problems, they were straight up assassinated by their opponents. The old rules were shattering. And all this led to, well, total chaos. The last 100 years of the Republic weren't peaceful at all. It was just a relentless, bloody cycle of civil wars. You had these ambitious strong men, Sulla, Pompey, Julius Caesar, using their private, loyal armies to fight each other for ultimate control of Rome. Each war was more destructive than the last, and it was tearing the Republic apart at the seams. The assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC
That was a last-ditch, desperate attempt by some senators to save the Republic from his dictatorship, but it was way too little, way too late. The system was already broken beyond repair. Instead of bringing back the old ways, all Caesar's death did was trigger one last, massive civil war.
When the dust finally settled, one person emerged from the chaos: Caesar's adopted son, a cunning young man named Octavian. He outmaneuvered and defeated all of his rivals, including Caesar's assassins, and then his former ally, Mark Antony, and his famous queen, Cleopatra. By 27 BC, he was the last one standing. The Senate gave him the title Augustus, the revered one, and just like that, in everything but name, he became Rome's very first emperor.
What followed Augustus's victory was something incredible: 2 straight centuries of peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. After 100 years of tearing itself apart, the Roman world was finally stable. Trade boomed. You could travel on safe roads and seas. The empire grew to its largest size ever, stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia. This is the era of the Colosseum, of massive aqueducts, of a unified culture that changed the world. For millions of people, it was the best time to be alive.
But that golden age couldn't last forever. The stability was shattered during the crisis of the 3rd century. This chart really gives you a sense of the chaos. In the first 250 years of the empire, you had about 25 emperors. But during one chaotic 50-year period in this crisis, there were over 20. It was a perfect storm of nonstop civil war, economic collapse, plague, and constant invasions. Being emperor basically became a death sentence.
So, a few iron-fisted emperors came along and tried some radical things to save the empire. Diocletian decided it was just too big to be governed by one man, so he actually split it into an eastern and a western half. Then Constantine came along, united the empire, but made 2 moves that would change the world forever. First, he moved the capital way to the east, to a new city he named Constantinople, and second, he legalized Christianity, which set the stage for it to become the dominant faith of the entire Western world.
These reforms definitely bought some time, but the end was coming, especially for the West. After the empire was permanently split in 395, the poorer, more vulnerable western half really started to crumble. Then, in 410 AD, the unthinkable happened. The city of Rome itself was sacked by invaders for the first time in 800 years. The final blow came quietly in 476, when the last Western Roman emperor, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, was removed from power by a Germanic chieftain. That's the date everyone points to as the fall of Rome.
But here's the thing. Did Rome really fall? In the West, yeah, the political structure collapsed. But in the East, the Roman Empire, which we now call the Byzantine Empire, kept on going for another 1,000 years. And even today, Rome's legacy is everywhere. It's in our languages, our legal systems, our architecture, our ideas about government. So maybe the real question isn't just how Rome fell, but whether, in a way, it ever really left us.